everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Cigar Chat. In this episode, I went ahead and compiled some clips of some recent interviews that Carlito Fuente has done. One of them was at the Cigar Heritage Festival a couple months ago. And he's talking about the history of Ybor City and the tobacco industry and the history of the tobacco business here in the Tampa area. And I think that the footage there was really great. There's a lot of great information there for all of you lovers of the leaf and all the Tampa history lovers like myself. I think you guys will really enjoy that. And then there's also a clip from the Meet the Professor show that he was on recently. So I want to say, thank you very much to JJ from the Bakersfield Gentleman for the footage that I'm using. And I also want to say thank you to Jose Blanco and the Meet the Professor show. All right. So stay tuned and enjoy the video. Thanks for watching.
Something that stuck out to me earlier when you were speaking from stage was your love for this city, the city that you grew up in. I'd love for the listeners here to hear a little bit about that, because I've seen you on many shows, but I haven't necessarily heard what you said on stage. And I'd love for you to kind of expand a little bit on that, about your life here in Ybor, what this city means to you, and what having the Heritage Festival here is like.
The feelings that I received, they're overwhelming for many, many reasons. First of all, I walked up and down these streets with my grandmother holding my hand as a little boy. My mom worked at Crest when she was a young girl, selling candy in the old days when you would put the scoop in and you weigh half a pound or whatever, all the different candies. And I remember even the little horsey in the front, you put a coin in, you ride it for a while. It was so many memories. But what I remember, this is a festival that celebrates cigar heritage. But Ybor City was once the cigar capital of the world. If you think back in the 20s and 30s, right before the war, Second World War, there were 500 million cigars made here with Havana tobacco. That's more than Honduras, Nicaragua, Mexico, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, all put together for the United States. That was in this community. Everywhere you looked, everywhere, they were small, little mom and pop shops making cigars, and over 200 large factories, brick buildings. With the whole community was around cigars. And just walking here, it was a way of life. If you were not a cigar maker, the time when I grew up, and before I grew up, actually, my parents, the times that they were raised here in Ybor City, if you weren't a cigar maker, you were a barber that cut the cigar maker's hair. You were a butcher that cut the meat for the cigar families, and it was a way of a community. But what I remember so much about Ybor City is just how everyone knew each other. How it was a community where everyone just gave back so much love. I learned that at home growing up, when everybody, my grandmother, in a small little wooden house with a tin roof here in Ybor City, but she cooked because she didn't know how many people would drop in. Not only smoke a cigar, but my grandfather, but everybody smoked cigars back then. But there's always enough food for everybody. They would play dominoes or poker or cards. And then they make a few cigars, and they wouldn't charge my grandfather for rolling those cigars, because they were a cigar maker. Just a way of giving back. And I remember if anybody had a fever or a cold, the whole neighborhood, there would be so much food and so much coming to your neighborhood, to your home. It was just a way of giving. So I've been asked so many times by people who visit us, where does this come from? It's getting back. And I said, I learned it at home. And this is what Ybor City is all about. This is what this community is all about. And this is what the Cigar Festival is all about. And this is what lives. This is what lives and breathes around the world with cigars. It brings people together. Since the discovery of America, it's brought people together. Tobacco was used for social reasons. It was used for medicinal reasons, but it was also something that's very spiritual to our culture. And it still lives here in Ybor City. It's been preserved. And to see people come from all over the world, thousands and thousands, they say up to 10, 11,000. You cannot find a hotel room. You cannot find a reservation in a restaurant. It's just everybody. It's a pure illustration of what cigars are about. Not about the smoking the cigar, but about the people, bringing the people together. And today, it's been testimony of what it is in this magnificent festival, with music, food, vendors, so many beautiful things, beautiful people, everything. It was flawless, with everybody hugging each other, loving each other. And there's no greater rewarding feeling than to come back to the hometown where you were born and see this love still living, not only surviving, but persevering and growing. It's a wonderful thing. I was born in Ybor. I was born here in Ybor City. My grandfather migrated from Havana, landed in Key West, came in the ferry at the age of 15. Because Key West was the big cigar industry. And then the industry actually, the big boom, they moved to Tampa, and Tampa became the cigar capital of the world. My grandfather raised his family here in Ybor City. My father was born here. And I was born in 1954 here in Ybor City. And I lived between Ybor City and West Tampa, the other side of the river, my entire life. Until I went to Nicaragua, and Honduras, and so forth. But my home was always Tampa. Ybor City is a city within the city of Tampa. It had its own community, its own chamber of commerce, its own mayor. If you look at the original flag of Ybor City, it's crest. The cigars in the center. And it's composed of 4 different flags. You have the U.S. flag, the Cuban flag, the Spanish flag, and the Italian flag. Because also Ybor City was the cradle to the immigrants that came from Italy. You remember, Tampa Bay is a natural port. All the tobacco came from Havana's on the Gulf of Mexico, so is Tampa Bay. And all the tobacco used to come from Havana, Cuban tobacco, and cigar makers and ferries into the port of Tampa. But also what came was rum. And in those days, Prohibition, Ybor City was run by the Italians. And a lot. Wait.
Oh.
A lot of times, you're Italian. You say you're Italian? No, I'm Sicilian. Because they were, and over the years in fusion, families. If you're an old Tampa family, you have uncles, aunts, or somebody who's either Sicilian, Spanish, Cuban, German, whatever. It's a big fusion. But if you go to Ybor City, right now they're doing expansion. I hear they're finding tunnels all over the place. Ybor City was a city of tunnels. It was the city of prohibition, of the rum and everything, tobacco, the gambling. The casinos of Havana were run out of Ybor City. The owners of those casinos lived in Ybor City. And there's a lot of history, and that's something, they have tours here and everything, what they call the mafia tours. I was always told never to use that word. To us, it was the family. The family. I was raised in a certain way, which is amazing, which I'm so proud of that culture, because that culture left us so much, left certain values that are so rare today in life. It is part of who I am, and it's what hopefully I could pass on to my children, because, folks, if we don't know where we come from, if we don't remember our past, we really don't know who the hell we are. And those, to me, even though there were days people may look at them at different days, I look on those were the days of glory. Those were the days of glory. Those are the days I parked in 1969 GTO in the middle of the street, find a yellow paper on there, a ticket, and call my grandfather. My grandfather called the judge and everything, and I just drive away. It's not that way anymore. But you know what? You have progress and so forth. But this is a special community. It's a very, very nice, knit community. And something happened in the 60s after the Cuban embargo. First thing, the Cuban embargo was the destruction, or the beginning of the destruction for the cigar world that Ybor City once was. There was no more raw materials. People moved out. People sold the companies. Everybody panicked. Most families either sold the business, but several families, like the Angel Oliva family, started bringing all the old Cuban farmers, because they were the saviors of the cigar industry. They were the suppliers and purveyors of all the Cuban leaf to all the factories that were able to hold out, They had the perseverance, had the love that were not willing to give up, even though business had collapsed with whatever it needed to get, to take families from Pinar del Rio, from Cuba to Honduras, eventually to Nicaragua, and so forth, eventually to the Dominican Republic. And it's families like them who are still here, it's their base, who still supply a lot of tobacco. And it's that heritage that is alive today, must be remembered, because we're enjoying cigars today, because of family like those, and they should be remembered, and which they are, and they're still around. It. This is just a great place. The things that took place in Ybor City after the collapse of the cigar industry because of political, economic situations with the economic embargo with Cuba. Ybor City, all of a sudden, families moved out. They put an interstate right between Ybor City. And I know that I should not get involved with how things happen, but you guys know how politics work. Ybor City was a powerhouse. Ybor City ran the city. Ybor City was its own world. So what they do, they bring an interstate, which they call development. And probably we see these things today, still in politics, how politics work. Right in the middle of the city, and start buying everybody out, moving everybody out. So they moved out to the outskirts. And Ybor City was laid empty and vacant for a good 25 years, maybe even 30. And a lot of things happened, but now Ybor City, because of where it's at, its history, has come back and is growing tremendously. I never left Ybor City. Or, I come back here. My headquarters is here. Our distribution center is here in Ybor City. Walking down the streets where were almost empty at one time, see it just packed with people the way it once was, and seeing all these wild roosters walking through the streets, and chickens and everything, because that's the yard that I grew up in. My grandfather raised roosters. There were roosters everywhere. It's it just brings me back to everything. The only thing that I cannot have is the tender, loving care of my mother's breast milk. But everything else, it's here in Ybor City. It brings me back to, it makes me feel alive again. I love it here. I'm so proud to have been born here, and I'm so happy to see how many people are really slowly understanding the heritage and the history that this great community is all about.
When you go back and you look at the origins of handmade cigars after the Cuban embargo, you're going to find that it's Mexico, Jamaica, Honduras became one of the biggest, fastest growing. It was the biggest, if I'm correct. But there was situations in Nicaragua. Everything that I've learned has to do with social, economic, political situations and so forth. Honduras was a lot more advanced than Nicaragua at that time. And Nicaragua was under a very strong dictatorship. But not because of that, because when my family moved to Nicaragua in the early 70s, we went to Nicaragua because General Somoza was a graduate of West Point. It was the safest, most pro-United States country in Central America. And all the Cubans, even though they were not making cigars, the Cuban families that migrated, that were that started, developing Honduras, and right after the embargo, and took a lot of families over. Most of those families, a lot of those families settled in Nicaragua. They weren't making cigars, but they were growing tobacco. A lot of the great names, many of my mentors of the early 70s that came from Huetabajo, Pinar del Rio, brought over by the Ángel Oliva family, who brought many people, including Bermejo, I believe Julio Iroa, the Iroas, and so many people at that time. There was a lot of great old traditional families and incredible value. But then comes the revolution. But just to go back, and when there was 4 factories when I was in Nicaragua and Esteli, just imagine, I think now there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and I don't know how many hundreds.
True.
But 4 factories. It was Joya, Nicaragua, which was owned by Somoza and Daniel Rodriguez. And you had Padron Cigars, a company that I never heard again after the factory was burned down, was Pulido Cigars, René Garcia Pulido. and who had been there before. And the company that we bought into were partners with Juan Francisco Bermejo and Fernando Fontisiella, which was named Victor Cigars in Esteli. After the revolution, everything was burned down. Everybody had to leave, make cigars in Honduras, try to survive, and so forth. Dominican Republic was not. My father tried to come here before going to Nicaragua, and there was no structure for investments, for foreign investments, until Ronald Reagan became president. He started the Caribbean Basin Incentive to help the countries around the United States develop, and that's when a free zone was being established. But it was in La Romana. My father found out, went to La Romana, was with the Corporation of Free Zone, back and forth negotiating, flew 3 or 4 times to the Dominican Republic. They made his life impossible. Well, we did not know at that time that a big company by the name of Gulf and Western was buying Garcia Menendez, Tabacalera Garcia, which became Tabacalera Garcia in Canary Islands. Canary Islands came to the Dominican Republic. Around that time, shortly after, you have the Colemans, you start having other smaller family. And when you get the 2 biggest companies in the industry, Consolidated, General, all the other companies, it just started growing. Remember, you could not do it. Nicaragua had an embargo. You cannot grow there and make cigars. So Nicaragua disappeared off the map for a while. And the Dominican Republic, it's really changed. It's like Dubai in the Caribbean, no question about it. With progress and so forth. Nicaragua, you have all the families start going back with a lot of opportunity years ago, a lot of labor. Now it's even difficult to find labor in Esteli. You had a lot of labor. You had a lot of land. When I was there was only 2 million people in the entire Nicaragua country, the biggest land country in Central America. I think now I heard there's 9 or so, 7 or 9. But you can imagine. And the cost of labor in Nicaragua is 1/3 of what is the Dominican Republic. The cost is so much less. It was so much less. Dominican Republic, to find someone to learn to make a cigar today, you got to go to a university and you got to take good care of them. That was not the situation in Nicaragua at that time. Mm-hmm. And Nicaragua just started growing. It was a lot easier to start up a factory in a little house in Nicaragua and grow from there than to come to the Dominican Republic. The infrastructure, the electricity, everything was the highest in the Caribbean. And that sacrifice that everybody who has been here all these years has paid off, because today we see the results that we live in a beautiful country, develop. And I tell you, it doesn't take a backseat to some of the greatest cities in the United States.